Most of the games I play nowadays would be considered experimental by majority of people. I'm not the biggest fan of the tired formulaic slop that the AAA industry keeps pumping out, which is why I generally gravitate towards indie games. Since there's no expectation, and usually no financial incentives, indie devs are free to try new things for better or for worse.
Just wow. You are really weird and gross. And floppy too. Anyways.
One trend I have noticed in the types of games I play is eccentric storytelling, whether it be implied plot points, intentional non-chronological ordering, red herrings that go on for so long that I'm genuinely confused when it's revealed to be one, all that stuff. I absolutely just eat it up. Something about just throwing ideas and chunks of the story at me and forcing me to puzzle together the plot just itches a certain part of my little gamer brain, and when it comes to this type of storytelling, I think one of the best examples of this is Critters for Sale. Critters for Sale is a point-and-click visual novel anthology that locked me in right from the start. I don't want to give too much away right now, but just for a quick out-of-context list, Critters for Sale covers topics like aliens, BDSM, Christian themes and iconography, doomsday, Indian food, reincarnation, murder, Michael Jackson, occultic themes and iconography, gambling, child crucifixion, Satan, timeline resets, and the Moon Temple. Everyone knows about the Moon Temple, right? Right? I can't be the only one. I'm sure you all know about them. If any of that sparked any interest at all, then I highly recommend you go play Critters for Sale before watching this video. I would hate to rob any of you of the absolutely schizophrenic experience that is this game. The link to the Steam page is at the top of the description. It's $10 and it takes like 3 hours tops to beat. Seriously, this is a game that you can really only experience once, so if you are at all interested, go play it and then come back to this video. There's your spoiler warning. I warned you, I'm spoiling mostly everything. If, however, you don't like visual novels, respectable, or just don't want to play it and want to know what it's about, then strap in because we are about to descend into the surreal and chaotic world of Critters for Sale. We'll get to the story in a minute, but let's cover the other aspects of this game before we begin to unpack all of that. Critters for Sale is a visual novel at its core. If somehow you don't know what a visual novel is, it's essentially an interactive book. You click through and read text, usually accompanied by music, backgrounds, and sprites to give it the visual aspect. Some games throw in mechanics or minigames, but in the end, you're reading a book. Doki Doki Literature Club and Ace Attorney are good, widely known examples, so I'd be thoroughly surprised if you had no idea what a visual novel was. Thankfully, Critters for Sale doesn't just throw text at you, it's also a point-and-click game. You move around the levels, there's puzzles, and other interactable content that makes it feel like I'm actually playing a game rather than just reading the ramblings of a psych ward journal. I will say, some of the puzzles are kinda bullshit, and I rather had to brute force my way through them, or I just gave up and googled it. High chance that I might just be stupid, but one of the puzzles you have to complete to beat the game requires info from sections of the game that I never saw, but I'll get more into that later. And that's really about it for gameplay. You move around and solve puzzles, but it's a visual novel. I think this was a good choice since visual novels really put the focus on the story, especially since it's the most entertaining aspect of this game by far. Not to say the story's the only good thing about Critters for Sale, its presentation is what originally drew me into the game. Critters for Sale immediately stood out to me. The game is entirely monochrome with this digital dithering that can be a bit harsh on the eyes, hence the epilepsy warning at the beginning. I get if people aren't into it, but I love this art style. There's a lot of games that have pixelated art styles, but Critters for Sale is just so visually striking that I bought it solely on screenshots. Terrible idea, by the way. I got very lucky. And now that I've played it, I can say this art style fits very well within the context of the story. It creates this surreal, otherworldly atmosphere that complements the insane plot very well. If this game had a more traditional art style, it would not be as impactful as it was, and the soundtrack complements this vibe perfectly. Critters for Sale's OST is eclectic, to say the least. It's fundamentally electronic, but it constantly bounces from genre to genre. I mean, look at the OST tags on Bandcamp. It has an obvious theme, but it is all over the place. It pulls from a plethora of influences, going from soulful deep house tracks like Theo Parrish's What You Cry For, to funky J-pop songs like Kikinoko's Shine, to the Asian folk-influenced synthwork of tracks like Mong Tong's Mi Jin, to the jazzy ambient house sounds of Susumi Yokada's Golden Stamen. Before jumping to industrial breakbeat tracks like Virtual Heaven's Noited Be Death, to the unsettling electronic sounds of Virtual Heaven's Mental O9000 that feels like it came straight from a declassified government brainwashing program. This soundtrack is a haphazard cacophony of genre fusions that is arguably my favorite aspect of the game. I love everything about this game, besides some of the puzzles, but the music just really hits in such a perfect way. With the insane plot and surreal art style, the soundtrack manages to bring it all together to create such a distressing yet inviting experience, where every song is placed exactly where it needs to be. I love the music, and it appeals to genres I already love, so it's no shocker that I enjoy it as much as I do. I usually listen to music while I'm working on these videos, and a majority of this soundtrack I've already added to the playlist. It fits great alongside all of the jungle, breakcore, and house that's already on there. The music is spectacular, but I'm Fantanoing at this point, so let's move on to the storytelling methods that Critters for Sale uses. Like I said at the beginning, Critters for Sale has a unique way of telling its story. It's an anthology, meaning that the story is broken into 5 distinct chapters following different people and different stories. However, they're all loosely connected to one another through various plot points and consistent themes that intertwine each chapter into a larger narrative. The chapters also play out of chronological order. We jump from the year 2033 to 923 to 1997, all the way to the beginning and end of time itself. This makes following the plot very confusing at times, but as you go along, you begin to piece together what's going on and the grand scheme of things. It can be a daunting task, but it is well worth it. With that said, it's about time that we finally get into what the story of Critters for Sale is. For some context, I'll be discussing each chapter as I played them with the events as they happened. Most chapters have multiple endings, so what I'll be covering, besides one ending, is what I believe to be the canon ending of each chapter and the canon storyline as a whole. I'll only be hitting the major points in the game that I believe to be relevant. If you want every detail in this game, I hate to sound like a broken record, but go play it. This game is such an oddity, and I would not want to rob you of this experience. Once we get through all 5 chapters, we'll circle back around and discuss the plot in a more manageable manner. So, with that said, let's take a moment before we begin diving into the madness of Critters for Sale. I want to give a huge shout out to my top supporters over on Patreon: Alexi, Owen, and Satazi. Thank you for the support. It really does help motivate me to keep making videos like these. And if you want your name shouted out in these videos, then head over to patreon.com/Eithan. And now, back to the video. Let's begin with Chapter 1, Snake. We play as Sergei Volkov, a 27-year-old man living in New York in the year 2033. We wake up in the dead of night by a text message from Michael Jackson? He's telling us to meet at the Limelight Club at 3 a.m. We're already awake, so we might as well go see what this is all about. We make our way to the club, and as we step inside, we're greeted to the electrifying atmosphere of the Limelight, a dimly lit club playing an absolute banger that I can't play here for copyright reasons. Wading through the crowd and chatting with the club's various patrons, we stumble across just actually Michael Jackson. We discuss his authenticity and why we're here, and yeah, it's really Michael Jackson. On top of that, we're actually best friends. Not this version of us at least, but in the future, because Michael and Sergei are actually time travelers who've been on many adventures, watching civilizations rise and fall while changing the lives of innumerable people. Before we can really start digging into our supposed past, or future, whatever, Michael cuts us off and says he's got a performance to do here tonight, and things will make a lot more sense once the Noidmen show up. We then see the crunchiest, most compressed clip of Michael performing to an incredible song. Just as the performance comes to a close, Michael kneels down and begins to pulsate a blinding white light as one of these aforementioned Noidmen show up with his gun drawn on Michael. In our confusion, Michael reminds us that we'll be seeing him soon, 12 years from today, on our second daughter's birthday. He leaves us with a toodle pip before getting his head blown off by the Noidman, who approaches us, greeting us as a old friend. Trying to figure out who this is, we lose ourselves in his familiarity before being flashbanged with seemingly all of human history before snapping back. We remember who we are, and we waste no time, leaving the Limelight with the Noidman. We have places to be. And that concludes Chapter 1. Already confusing, but don't worry, it gets much worse as we begin Chapter 2, Goat. We open on Jafar, a 42-year-old man wandering the Arabian deserts of Jordan in the year 923 AD, waiting our traveling partner Stefan to return to base camp. Once he does, we see that the Stefan we've been traveling with is fucking MC Ride, the lead singer of Death Grips. This was a pleasant surprise. I love Death Grips. I used to listen to them a lot, and after playing this game, it got me to go back and listen to Death Grips again. My opinion has not changed. I still think they're one of my favorite experimental artists, but let's keep going. Stefan tells us that the voice in his head says that the mysterious cave we've been looking for is just north of our base camp. And before we leave, Stefan tells us that we should probably leave the goat we brought with us at camp, since rumor says that animals tend to go feral the closer they get to the cave. Just accepting that we're following the orders of the voice inside this guy's head, we reluctantly leave our goat at camp and begin our trek with Stefan towards this supposed cave. While on our expedition, Stefan reveals some of the insights the voices told him. Plotted in the middle of the Jordanian desert, the cave is sealed by a monolithic stone door and guarded by what the voice says are aggressive, hostile, otherworldly figures. Despite this, the voice says nothing of the contents of the cave. We obviously question the voice's legitimacy. It's incredibly easy to assume that the voice could be a hallucination of Stefan's mind being baked by the desert sun, and when we confront Stefan about this, he gets a bit hostile towards us and diverts the conversation. On our way north, we stumble across a well in the middle of the desert. Peering down into its seemingly bottomless darkness, we get lost in the abyss before coming back to the message: you have acquired a double consciousness. Not entirely sure what that means, but we keep moving forward until we find Stefan at the top of a dune staring down at something. Stefan tells us to take a look, and that's when we see we're getting close, and the road ahead of us seems to lead to the cave we've been looking for. As we step towards the cave, Stefan snaps our neck. He resents our skepticism and doesn't feel like sharing what's in the cave. Our body slumps to the ground, dead. However, that only kills one of our consciousnesses. Our newly acquired second consciousness shifts to the closest person to us: Stefan. We see through his eyes as Stefan makes his way to the fabled cave and utters the magic words. The door opens, revealing the cave's inhabitant, Mustafa. He's been the voice in Stefan's head all along and now offers Stefan a choice. Mustafa holds out two pills, one white and one black. Take the white pill, Mustafa leaves, and all the riches within the cave are Stefan's to keep. Take the black pill, however, and Mustafa will turn Stefan into the first of the Noid men, and together they will carry out the will of Satan. Stefan chooses the black pill and is inducted as the first Noid man. We cut to roughly 1,000 years ahead, where Stefan is now the lead singer of Death Grips, the experimental hip-hop band. At least that's what the public knows. Behind the scenes, Death Grips is actually a front for Stefan and his accomplices, Zack and Andy, to spread evil throughout mankind and fulfill Satan's legacy. And that's where Chapter 2 ends. I don't even know where to start unpacking these implications, but we're just going to move on as we enter one of the most important chapters of the game, Chapter 3, Monkey. The year is 1997. We play as 19-year-old Othman in Morocco's Old Medina on our way to a Nawa ceremony, Alila, where the Malim, a shaman of sorts, invokes the 7 spirits of the Nawi pantheon, providing spiritual healing to attendees. Othman and his 11-year-old cousin Omar have been invited to tonight's ceremony by his good friend Jamal, who's related to the owner of tonight's venue, Chuwafa Aicha. On our way, we encounter 2 veiled women, asking them for directions. They say that they are residents of Sunra's Gardens, a floating island above the Earth that came from another timeline? Alright, they don't know where the palace is. They're essentially just tourists, taking the form of locals as their original forms cannot exist in this reality. Bidding us farewell, we continue onward until we stumble across a date stand. The date seller, who says he knows Omar, gives us proper directions, and when asked about how he knows Omar, he replies, "Everyone in the Celestial Realm does." He tells us that's where the higher beings live, particularly the Paradise Architects, and that they're actually inside the stand waiting for us. We enter the stand where we meet one of the Paradise Architects, Light Mason, who drops some massive info. The Paradise Architects are the servants of God on Earth. They've been warned that a group known as the Noidmen will emerge on the Day of Judgment to unleash corruption and evil upon mankind. Unfortunately, today is the day that the leader of the Noidmen will assume his position, and we will play a crucial role in it. He tells us Offman will regret what happens today, but this is part of a plan bigger than any of us could imagine, so we shouldn't beat ourselves up over it too bad. After all that, we just leave, continuing our journey like nothing just happened until we reach the palace of Chihuahua Aicha. We approach the palace, noting two doors on the front, the main entrance and a black side door that's locked. Inside the main entrance, we chat with other attendants who gush over the importance and thrill of the Lila. We explore the palace, finding some sort of dark barrier blocking our path through the palace, alongside a key lying on a table on one of the balconies, and going back out front, we use the key to unlock the black door we saw earlier. Behind the door is one of those sliding tile puzzles depicting some sort of grotesque face. Remember earlier when I said that some of the puzzles were ass and I had to brute force them? Yeah, I just slid around random pieces for like 10 minutes, but eventually I was able to complete it, revealing the Ambassador of Evil, who tells us the Dark Barrier has been lifted at the cost of us and this timeline. And he says that once the timeline resetter joins their side, there will be no turning back. Back inside the main palace, past where the barrier stood, we finally find Chihuahua Aicha. We exchange some pleasantries before she asks us if we could inform the Malim that the next stage of the ceremony is ready to begin. We begin heading to the Malim before Chihuahua states that she can watch Omar while we speak with the Malim. Leaving Omar with her, we enter the room ahead of us, a balcony where 3 people sit. 2 stoic individuals who we don't recognize and 1 familiar face. Mustafa, our Malim for the night. We inform Mustafa that the next phase is ready, to which he asks if Omar is with Chihuahua. We agree, and Mustafa says that our purpose is fulfilled. All we can do is sit back and watch what unfolds. Mustafa and his associates leave for the ceremony room, and as we retreat back as well, we find the room packed full of attendees. Trudging our way through the crowd, we find a horrific sight in the center of the room. Omar, fastened to a crucifix on the brink of death. We see Mustafa and ask why he would do something like this. He turns to us, saying we just walked Omar into their trap they've been planning for decades, and with Omar's blood, they can now awaken the devil. Mustafa brandishes a knife and plunges it into Omar, and within the blink of an eye, before us stands Satan. Mustafa pleads with him, begging for a favor in return for his devout servitude.
Possess my dead corpse.
Mustafa is sucked into the abyss to remain until the end of time. His purpose is to gather a ring of time travelers and to rule the world in the favor of Satan. And with that ends chapter 3. Man, that was pretty heavy stuff. Honestly, setting aside the celebrity appearances, this was the most shocking of all the chapters in this game. It's a lot to take in, but we gotta keep going, so let's cover something a bit lighter to cleanse the palate. Like human extinction in chapter 4, Spider. We play an unnamed protagonist in New York City, 1997, and what we're about to witness will change the history of mankind. We're introduced to the Doomsday Casino, a mystical place teeming with people from Earth and beyond. The lines between reality and fantasy muddle inside this building, and our narrator tells us to tread with caution. We begin the story outside the casino, basking in its energetic glow before coming across the owners of the Doomsday, Sasha and Gosha. We tell them we spotted the casino from our hotel and thought to check it out before we left New York. They tell us that there's only a few hours left for all life on Earth, and to enjoy our stay at the Doomsday. Heading inside the lobby, we chat with the Doomsday's unusual guests, and after a few nonsensical ramblings, we make our way to a set of slot machines surrounding a dancing man known as the Gimp. Talking with him actually gives us two big pieces of information. The first is that the Neptunians have claimed Earth as their own and plan to bring doom upon all of humanity tonight at midnight, backing up what Sasha and Gosha told us earlier. The second piece of information is much more cryptic. The Gimp knows us. He says we're undergoing a metamorphosis, and that by the time we become Prince, we will part ways with our voice and be forced to watch the collective hive mind puppeteer our actions. Okay, sure. Keep it in mind. We'll come back to it later. For now...
Let's go gambling! Aw, dang it.
No, unfortunately there's no slots, just a series of cognitive tests. Reaction time, pattern recognition, memory, aim training, you get the idea. Talking with the Gimp earlier, he actually told us that the results from the machines contribute to the research of a company called Jufei, who do pay handsomely, with each of the 6 machines giving you $10,000 if you meet their standards. After we easily breeze through each test, and with 60 grand now in our pockets, we continue conversing with the guests of the casino. Apparently, societies from all over have been fighting to take control of Earth. Mars, Neptune, Jupiter, even people outside our reality. We also find a guy who says he knows about the Doomsday Machine, the machine that's going to wipe out humanity tonight, and that there's a hotel room upstairs that leads right to it. Just so happens he's selling the key to that room for $60,000. Exactly what we made from beating the tests earlier. But we'll find our way back to this guy later, there is still so much to explore. We notice a slot machine tweaking the fuck out, and as we approach the machine, we finally get to meet my favorite character in Critters for Sale, the Martian. He spouts off about how pissed he is that the Neptunians are planning this invasion, but the Martians are right behind him, planning to intercept the Neptunian ships on their way to Earth before anything can happen. Pressing him about the Neptunians and the Martians, he pivots the conversation to talk about how he's always wanted to try spicy food here on Earth, but needs to stay put with everything going on tonight. Wandering around the casino, we can actually find a DoorDash driver. He's here to drop off some Indian food for one Borja Butch. He asks if that's us, and lying through our teeth, we take the Indian food back to the Martian. Getting jump scared once again? We give the food to the Martian and he loves it. Enough that he decides to call his dad, the King of Mars, and asks him to just casually call off the invasion. Apparently, we've been talking to the Prince of Mars, and with that quick call, the Martian regime hijacks the Doomsday Machine and intercepts the Neptunian fleet before anything happens. We ditch the Doomsday Casino and spend the rest of the night with the Martian, indulging in all the spicy foods Earth has to offer. And that's it! We get a whole ass "you lived" screen like we beat the chapter. Obviously, I don't think this is the canon ending, but saving the earth through the power of Indian food was way too funny to not include. Getting that "you lived" screen caught me completely off guard. I was fully expecting there to be some more steps to it, and I really love the idea of someone playing this game, getting that ending, and just moving on. Like, yep, that was the end. No need to play through it again. That's the canon ending. Even though it is really funny. Let's jump back a bit and see what I think is the actual canon ending. Remember that key from earlier? The one the guy was selling for 60 grand? Well, with our gambling winnings, we can buy the key off him. We make our way to the hotel room, opening to find an empty room with a mask lying on the ground. Placing the mask on our face, we now have a new set of eyes on our screen, and talking with any guest at the casino, they seem completely unsettled by our appearance and want nothing to do with us. One person who isn't disturbed by our visage is the Gimp, commenting that our metamorphosis is finally complete. Exploring the casino with our new perspective, we find the entrance to a tower at the very back of the casino, and climbing to the top, we find a person floating in the center of the room. They inform us the Neptunians have been dealt with by the Order of the Paradise Architects, and that we, again being referred to as Prince, must carry out a timeline reset by going to the Moon Temple through the portal in the casino. Everyone knows about the Moon Temple, right? Making our way to the hotel section, we find a large door with an eye in the center, and after a quick scan and being called Prince once again, the door opens, revealing the Moon Temple. The earth hangs ominously over the tall Roman-style pillars, and we approach a monument with a different familiar face that isn't Mustafa this time. It's the Ambassador of Evil. Below him is a sarcophagus, and as we open it, we come face to face with the timeline resetter. He says that we should focus on humanity's survival, as we are the prince and heir of mankind's new resurgence. And with a bright flash, we then appear in an endless desert with a single monolith looming in the distance. Approaching the monolith, it tells us that we are on Earth at the beginning of time, and we must march forward to bring about a new age for humanity. And so concludes Chapter 4. What a wild ride, and by far my favorite chapter in Critters for Sale. The setting, the music, the characters, everything. I don't have any complaints. That was phenomenal. We're almost done, so buckle up for the final chapter in Critters for Sale. Chapter 5, Dragon. We play as yet another unnamed protagonist who's just arrived at the Reincarnation Palace, a mystical realm adorned with Roman architecture and a large ornate pool in the center. We dive into the pool as the palace's new tenant and find ourselves in an open sky hallway. There's 4 labeled doors and a statue standing atop the end of the hallway. We discover that the statue is actually a man, frozen in time, who tells us some interesting information. He says that he made it to the palace uninvited and that his situation, being frozen in time, must be a punishment from God for opposing him. He also says that on his passage to the palace, he saw someone named Geiger and the rest of a group called PSG Ultima before speaking of an all-encompassing end, that evil will soon take over this palace. He mentions that God allows PSG Ultima to oppose his system, but ultimately will be punished in the end. Aside from the lore dump, he does tell us how we can leave the Reincarnation Palace. We have to retrieve the 4 talismans in order to reincarnate, so with that info, we decide to head through the first door. Room 1 contains a lush jungle, notably with a telephone booth near the entrance. Exploring the area, we find a white tiger named Mania who puts us through our first test. We're given a description of the personality we'll be reincarnated as, and must answer a series of questions that align with the described personality to assure that we're in the right headspace for our vessel. This puzzle is really interesting. You really do have to get into the right headspace to answer them all correctly. And after answering all the questions, Mania gives us the first talisman. Room 2 consists of 3 tunnels, 2 leading to different mountains and the center one blocked by 2 figures called the Messengers. They say the tunnel behind them is a palace reserved for higher beings and that we cannot proceed. They do offer us a small safe, of which we can keep the contents if we can open it. The safe is locked with a password and a small man in the corner gives us a hint. Refer to the Doomsday Machines. I'll be completely honest, I haven't talked about the Doomsday Machines much because I never came across any of them in my playthrough. There's apparently 4 of them in the game and I somehow managed to miss every single one. I made a decision because I didn't want to go through and play through every ending in this game just to find this code, so I kinda googled it. I know, I'm a fraud. Breaking news, YouTuber cheats at video game.
This has never happened before.
I'm sorry that I didn't want to backtrack for like 3 hours. The password was Eastern Nosferatu Metamorphosis Project. How the fuck was I supposed to guess that? Regardless, we crack the safe and find our second talisman. Remember earlier in the video when I was saying there was a puzzle you had to complete to beat the game that used information that I never got? This is it. This was the one. This is stupid. We head to room 3, which consists of a long empty road in a city with a piano sitting near the entrance. Heading down the road, we find the High Temple, accompanied by a brigade of soldiers, and speaking with the colonel, he says that they've conquered our vessel so we don't have to. He recites their military cadence, and if we return to the piano and replay the cadence on it, the piano floats up, revealing a hole underneath it containing the third talisman. Pretty quick and simple, there's not a ton to this room, but it's still kinda cool. Upon entering room 4 for the first time, we find a clown in a suit with a gun, who, before we can even say anything, shoots us. Booting us back to the hallway. Re-entering room 4, it's a pretty standard living room with a figure leaning against a pillar. This is the Wandering Ego, who we ask about the Reincarnation Palace, how we ended up here, and how to leave. They say that the palace is at the end of time itself, and that normally the Keeper would give us some guidance, but he's on vacation at the moment. They do have the Keeper's phone number, however, so we jot that down and explore the rest of the room. A glowing doorway leads us to a study with a large statue of Earth, and on it a spider with 6 points on its limbs that we can connect. Not sure what to do with the spider puzzle, we head to the phone booth in room 1, and after calling the Keeper, he says he can't really help us over the phone, but that the occult anatomy diagram at the end of the main hall could help, to which he gives us the pin to unlock. During this call, our protagonist mentions that we remember some faint details from our previous life, time travel, Noid men, aliens from Neptune, and the Keeper remarks, "You come from those timelines? As far as you're concerned, I don't think they matter anymore." Another point to keep in mind. We head to the Occult Anatomy Diagram, which is a cryptic series of charts, symbols, and unreadable texts. The first thing that stuck out to me on this diagram was the Doomsday Machine decoder, which would have been nice if I found any. The next thing was the 4 slots on the diagram, each correlating to one of the talismans. Other than those, the important part right now is the 5 symbols scattered around the diagram, which just so happen to be made of 6 points, like our spider puzzle. Inputting each of the symbols into the spider, the Statue of Earth opens, revealing the 4th and final talisman. We make our way back to the Occult Anatomy diagram, and as we slide each talisman into their respective slots, the diagram splits open to reveal a solar eclipse, and descending from said eclipse is Geiger and PSG Ultima. Geiger speaks, prophesying that we will join them in due time to rule the universe, abiding by the will of evil. Alongside Geiger, making up the roster of PSG Ultima, is our good old friend Mustafa, and someone referred to as the Pharaoh, who I never met in my playthrough, and from some quick googling, I don't think is in the game besides this ending, at least not referred to as the Pharaoh. My headcanon, it's just MC Ride. The sprite looks like it could be MC Ride, and if you take the white pill during chapter 2, you live out as Stefan being a wealthy noble in ancient Jordan. So maybe the Pharaoh is a reference to this other timeline that PSG Ultima would definitely be aware of from all the timeline hopping they do. Geiger continues, saying we are the chosen fourth member of PSG Ultima, and once we inevitably join, Satan will finally control the universe. Geiger says we'll meet again before a bright flash of light shows we've been reincarnated. We jump to 23 years later when we come into contact with PSG Ultima once again, revealing we are Nosferatu of the East, the Wings of Darkness. We play a crucial role in the grand scheme of things, but that's a story for another time. And that was the story of Critters for Sale. Wow. That was something else. I really don't know what to say. This game is such an experience. I can't think of anything else that I feel the same way I do about this game. The plot is incredibly convoluted and jumbled out of order, so it can be difficult to follow what's actually happening with all the time travel and different timelines and whatever else this game decides to throw in there to make things as unclear as possible. Because of this, you can kinda choose what you think is real or not. This game gives you a mountain of lore to sift through with little structure, so it leaves you to interpret the game however you want. And I think that's pretty sick. There are loose connections from one chapter to the next, so there is a general overarching plot that consists through everything which we can finally piece together. Critters for Sale shows us the battle between good and evil, God and Satan, each with their own servants. On God's side, we have the Paradise Architects, maintaining balance in the universe and making sure humanity doesn't fuck itself up too bad. And on Satan's side, we have PSG Ultima, your average Discord group chat, and the Noidmen, both serving the purpose of spreading evil and executing Satan's will on Earth. Both chapters 3 and 5 only have a single ending, so I'm going to assume those as canon. This means the only two canonical events that definitely happen are Omar being sacrificed for Mustafa to become the first Noid Man and eventually joining PSG Ultima, and Nosferatu's reincarnation and his eventual allegiance to PSG Ultima. And that's it. Everything else is basically up for you to decide, but my interpretation of what the plot is supposed to be is as follows. God and Satan are fighting for control of the universe. God has the Paradise Architects, but Satan doesn't have anyone to carry out his will on Earth. That is, until Mustafa sacrifices Omar, makes a deal with the devil, and becomes the first Noid Man, being trapped in a cave for who knows how long. That is until MC Ride finds his cave in the desert and joins him as the second Noid Man. At some point, Geiger, who I think is just the mortal form of Satan, creates PSG Ultima, inviting Mustafa and MC Ride to help realize his goal of demonic rule. Eventually, PSG Ultima manages to invade the Reincarnation Palace and invites Nosferatu to join, completing the prophecy. I'm honestly not too sure how chapters 1 and 4 fit into this overarching narrative, but I do have theories. I actually have a couple theories about the game in general. We'll kind of rapid fire these because this video is already getting really long. Have you looked at the runtime recently? Holy shit. First theory. PSG Ultima and the Noidmen are actually just a hive mind of Satan. Mustafa literally asks him to possess his dead corpse. I think Geiger is just the devil himself, and MC Ride could have just died when he took the black pill, allowing Satan to pilot his body. Bit of a stretch on that last point, but I'm just shooting ideas off here. Second theory, the protagonist of Chapter 4 is just Nosferatu from a different timeline. Both are the only chapters to leave the protagonist unnamed. We don't know about Nosferatu until literally the end of the chapter. Both are undergoing some sort of metamorphosis as told by Geiger and the Gimp, and both are princes to a degree. Chapter 4's protag is literally called the Prince, and Nosferatu could be defined as a prince in the context of PSG Ultima. It could be that Chapter 4 is an alternate timeline where Nosferatu just never made contact with PSG Ultima and ended up at the Doomsday Casino for some reason. This is the one theory out of all of these that I will stand by regardless. A lot of things line up in ways that make it seem very plausible. And now, something a lot less plausible with my third theory. Michael Jackson Jackson is actually a Paradise Architect. This is the furthest reach I will make, and the only piece of evidence that actually supports this is the fact that Michael Jackson glows white kinda like the architects do. Sergei was obviously associated with the Noidmen at some point, but seems to have had his memories wiped or suppressed. Maybe Michael was trying to convert Sergei to the side of the Paradise Architects before his memories came back? I don't know. Fourth theory. Sun Ra's gardens are aliens from the Spider timeline, and this one also has some good evidence. First off, the residents of Sun Ra's gardens straight up say they come from another timeline. They apparently live on floating islands above the Earth, which sounds like spaceships, just saying. They also say that when they come to Earth, they have to, quote, take a form that exists in this reality whenever we ask them why they look like locals. If aliens don't originally exist in Chapter 3, they'd have to take some other form to interact with this world. It's very possible that Sun Ra's gardens somehow managed to slip past the timeline reset and end up in the monkey timeline. The Spider protag was able to jump from one timeline to another, so who's to say they couldn't? I could be very wrong about all of these. There's a lot of the game that I didn't get to see, so these are just my assumptions. These are just for fun. Don't take any of this as canon fact. Who knows? Maybe Michael Jackson is actually Light Mason. Maybe the Doomsday Casino is a metaphor for the Cold War. Maybe the statue guy from Chapter 5 is actually all in lay head. This all proves my earlier point even further. The game will let you interpret it however you want. Everyone who plays this experiences their own story. Unless you go back through and play through every ending, but that's no fun. Point is, I fucking love it. Critters for Sale is a game that I wish I had played sooner. I bought this game almost a year ago in July of 2024 because I thought the art style looked cool, and it just gathered dust in my Steam library until now. The striking visuals, the outstanding OST, the batshit insane story, the mix of surreal and otherworldly ideas and concepts, nothing even comes close to doing what Critters for Sale does, at least from my experience. This game is just so different. Putting it up against other games I've played, and trust me, I've played some very schizophrenic games, Critters for Sale stands out as a masterclass of disjointed storytelling that makes you want to figure it out. It's confusing, for sure, but piecing together what the plot of Critters for Sale is was one of the most satisfying experiences I've had in a while. I also haven't played many visual novels recently, so this was a very exciting step back into the genre. And it's great, because with how anarchic and labyrinthine the story is, it's safe to assume that everyone playing this game will have an experience that is uniquely theirs. Unless you go back through and play through every... I missed 7 of the endings, so there's plenty I did not cover here for people to go discover. I would highly recommend for everyone to go play Critters for Sale. Even you, still watching this far into the video. Go play the game. It's truly something that should be experienced firsthand, but at least now you have an idea of what you're going to get into. This video ended up being way longer than I expected, but if you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel if you want to see me cover some more freaky niche indie games in the future. It's kind of my jam. There's the Patreon as well if you want to support this channel even further. Again, shout out to my patrons for supporting my addiction to what my friends have been referring to as, quote, Eithan games. I'm gonna go start working on the next video. It'll be a nice change of pace to look at a game with colors. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for sticking until the end. Have a good rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.